One thing that I experienced and that was key during my administration is that what is always said in economy, that to defeat poverty, you have to grow the size of your economy, the per capita income, and the distribution of income. And that's only partially true, because during my administration, we grew on the average of 2.5% a year, which is not much, compared to the double-digit rates of growth of China, or the 8 or 9% growth of India, or other nations that grow way above 5%. But even with having grown at 2.5%, the economy, we still were able to reduce poverty by 35%. 35% of Mexican families during those 6 years had the opportunity to overcome by their own effort their condition of poverty. And they became middle class, modest middle class. And how can this be done? And I bring in a factor that I consider most important and that I learned from my finance minister, Mr. Paco Gil, that stability is a key issue on the economy. That first of all, first responsibility with the economy is making sure that everybody keeps its assets, its revenue in actual terms and is not eroded by inflation. In Latin America during the 20th century, most every nation, averaged for the decade rates of growth of 2%, 1%. And when you take the long run, 30 or 40 years, Latin America growth is totally disappointing. And the increase of the rate of poor was growing every year. And the problem was that we had every other year these mammoth devaluations, this mammoth economic crisis that will take you backwards all what you had advanced before. And of course, your currency kept losing value in front of the currencies of the rest of the world. So there was no way for the poor to come along. There was no way for business and investment to have sustainable growth on long-term periods. And that's why stability of the economy is a key issue and really pays off. And this takes me to, in the analysis, watch after the difference between quantitative development and qualitative development. Because even the economy not growing at a fast rate, if you bring in powerful social policies and you associate them to the economy, then you get a much better answer. When I'm speaking about powerful social policies, I'm speaking about education, human capital building, health, housing, and direct combat to poverty. When you exercise on the budget a very strong share of that budget on these powerful social policies, then you attain the distribution of income, even though the size of the pie might not be growing at the rate that you would expect. Inflation is a key ingredient to make sure that you attain the distribution of income and that the real income received by families is increasing every year. So controlling inflation, and that's part of having a stability, is a key issue on this.
Buenas tardes, señor presidente. Muchas gracias por sus palabras. I have a question, and it has to do with Pemex. You briefly touched on it. If the government budget is so dependent on Pemex, and we're going to be seeing a huge decline in production of oil, I've also been told that the bad news of Pemex is maybe 10 times worse than what is publicly acknowledged. What is the government doing about fitting in the money? Where is that going to come from if they've been so dependent on Pemex for so long, and they won't be able to in the near future?
Yeah. It's a key issue in the case of Mexico. And sometimes I think that that resource was not given to Mexico by God, that it was given by the devil. Because it represents over 40% of the total budget of the nation, including the 3 levels of government, federal, state, and municipal. 40% of the budget comes from the oil. And that has made us lazy in Mexico. Because against that, what we have, our total fiscal income, our total revenue, tax revenue, is 11% of gross product. I don't know how aware are you with those data, but a case like United States is over 30%, 32% of gross domestic product is the take of government to build the budget. Case of Brazil and Chile have already reached 30%. We are, maybe except Haiti or somebody else, the lowest country in fiscal income. What has happened is that we have used the oil to compensate for the taxes we're not collecting. If we add the oil, which is about 9% of gross product, the revenue of oil, we go up to 20%. Taxes plus oil income. Still is very low for today's challenges and needs. Europe, all nations are over 40% of gross product is their fiscal income. So we have a problem there. Problem number 2 with the oil is the monopoly. I mean, we're using resources that we could be using for building human capital, and we're investing in oil fields, in oil exploration, in building refineries. I'm sorry, but that's stupid. I would gladly change each one barrel of oil that we have for one kid in university. Absolutely better to invest our money not in getting the oil, but on building human capital. Unfortunately, this paradigm that comes back from 1936 or 8, when the oil was nationalized by Presidente Cárdenas, that became a paradigm in Mexico. And the first one that tried to change that was my administration. I submitted a bill to Congress to change that. Didn't pass through. Presidente Calderón submitted the same proposal, didn't pass through, except the small changes, but not relevant to the problem, to the size of the problem. Look at Brazil, Petrobras. It's been a miracle. It's been a miracle in the last 12 years since Presidente Cardoso decided to go ahead and put in the open market 30% of the stock of Petrobras. So it became a blend or a mix of public and private investment and has moved impressively. Today, Petrobras is in Asia, is in Norway, is everywhere in Africa and the world working, drilling, getting oil, exporting. Very, very successful. Private administration, private principles to administrate, not public. The worst administrator ever and anywhere is government. It's government. So when you go looking for a job, go to government to see if you can change it, please. I couldn't. I couldn't.